Greetings! It is I, Tentis Naravan Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor here at the Dracovin Empire. And welcome! We're chatting about some more tabletop. Of course, it's... I don't know if it's everybody's favorite, but it certainly is a favorite of mine. We're talking Shadowrun today. Shadowrun, there's a lot of things to dive into. I certainly could do like a continent/country guide. Talking about the various different continents and how the various countries that exist now in the Shadowrun storyline, how they've altered and changed. But there was a major location that I thought would be great to visit. Seattle. And you may say, why is Seattle so important? It's the very reason why it's used in... that's not the right way to say this. In pretty much all the Shadowrun base media, all the core editions, when they talk about a specific location or they give information about something that is used as an example of Shadowrun, the world as a whole, Seattle has long been since the example. Seattle has an incredible amount of like storyline behind it and its existence in the Shadowrun world. It is technically still part of the UCAS, the United Canadian American States, which is the closest thing to the United States that exists still. You have to remember that the company FASA that created Shadowrun, it's an American-based company. It's a original English-based adventure or role-playing system. So, and I think they might have been based out of Seattle. I'd have to find that out. That's a question that I can ask and find out about. But regardless, it's one of those things that their existence and the current one's in Illinois. The old one was also in Illinois. So they weren't. I guess it was the entire thing that Seattle was a hotbed of the tabletop industry. Maybe? I don't know. Because it's an interesting thing that the original Shadowrun came about during the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. That's around the time that, TSR was around. Where's Tia? Where were you? Wisconsin. I don't know. They must have just liked Seattle, honestly. There's a lot of questions as to why they did Seattle, and I always thought it was related to stuff, but... Well, just a little bit of cursory research there, and I'm not sure why they chose it, honestly. But nonetheless, they chose Seattle what would become the Seattle State, the Seattle Metroplex, Seattle City, in the Shadowrun universe as a kind of example zone. A lot of the basic information starts off with, hey, here's Seattle. Now, granted, it doesn't mean that other areas of the world are introduced and talked about, and other cities aren't. Denver is one that is kind of implied a lot. But I guess this is positioning between a lot of the major powers. It's a UCAS state. It's surrounded by one of the Native American nations, the Salsidae. It is on the Pacific, meaning it can easily have connections with things like the Japanese Empire, well, the Japan as it is now, and a lot of the other major countries. So it has this entire existence to it that makes it unique. So it is honestly one of those ones that there's enough details about it that if you're going to choose a city, it's a very easy city to choose. There are so many details about it that I can tell you about. And the books that I will be going over today, well, I'm really going to be using the, I think it's 4th edition book, Seattle's 2072, 4th or 5th edition. Actually, I can find that out for you folks as I mention it, because I could be smart there. The 4th edition book, thank you. I had to look it up there. Runner's Havens, which I believe is also a 4th edition book, also gives some information on Seattle, but it also gives additional cities. So those are both from Cattle's time period. But we're talking about earlier ones. The Seattle Source book from 2nd edition and the New Seattle book from 3rd edition are also books that you could check out. They have information on it. The information hasn't been super updated. It has here and there. But nonetheless, the main book that I'll be talking about, not that I don't have the other books to talk about them, is of course Seattle 2072. I'm also using the Shadowrun wiki as a basic information for some summary, which we're going to start out with before I dive into the book proper. And the information on there is basically a combination of all those books with a couple other sources. So that's our Seattle, kind of basic that we're going over here. Throw me up in the corner now. Let's see if this is correct. This should be the right one. Yes, there we go. So this is, as of 2050, which is an earlier edition, the Seattle metroplex, the Seattle state. Just zooming in here, you can see that Seattle as a whole is much smaller. You can probably Google. Let me just turn this off for a second and Google Seattle so we can take a look at this. Seattle. I can kind of like show this off using Google Maps. And compare it. There you go. There's the Google Maps version of it, of Seattle. Just want to make sure nothing pops up that's different. And comparing it to here, where downtown is really the main part of Seattle, it's just this entire metroplex area is officially Seattle then. I didn't see anything popping up my location when I'm just Googling Seattle, but I'll remember to inconvenient. If I need to worry about it, I'll do it. Yeah. So, yeah. It's a big chunk of this area from Tacoma to Everett, which is Everett now, and below it too. So this entire zone, kind of in here, which my mouse cursor, is that showing up? Oh, it is. My mouse cursor is showing up. Is where it is now in Washington State, which is actually a pretty big chunk of the state, actually, if you can see, of what remains of the state. Anyway, we'll go back over here. So it's a pretty big area. That's all I wanted to show off there for that little bit there. I'm going to keep this map up, and we're going to zoom in on the map when we talk about the different districts there. So this area here is, as I said, it is on the Pacific Coast. It is the only UCAS location on Pacific Coast. The UCAS is basically the southeastern Canada plus a large chunk of North America, say for the CAS, the Confederate American States, because the South broke away. Not the same reasons as they did previously. In different reasons they broke away. Anyway, that's an entirely different story. If I was going to dive into these UCAS and the North American history of countries, that might be a thing to do. Anyway, Salish Sede, as I said, surrounds this place. It is one of the Native American nations. They control the waters that trade out of Seattle would go through. So they control the waters of Puget Sound and the Juan de Fuca Strait. However, the Treaty of Denver, which created Seattle and Denver as basically specialized cities, also gave provisions that Seattle has unlimited access through these passages. So effectively, Seattle's allowed to use these passages for free as part of it. As I said, other than being Seattle State, Seattle Metroplex, the area that's called downtown in here, Seattle downtown, which we'll zoom into here, that is Seattle as it was. So downtown here is the former city known as Seattle as part of this entire Metroplex. The population of around the 2070 mark was around 4 million through this entire area, though it assumes that there's about 2 million unregistered, basically. Yeah, so fortunately I didn't click, so I'll keep that in mind, though, for doing that in the future. Thank you, Warren. It covers about 3,000, a little less than 4,000 square kilometers for 4 million people, and about 2 million estimated unregistered, so non-sin people. It is the most populated density in any of the UCS states. That's an important thing about this area. It is the most populated area in all the UCAS. Remember, there were two, basically, there was a whole lot of apocalyptic events happening, massive amounts of natural disasters because of the awakening of magic, and two plagues that put COVID-19, putting us a little, our real world to shame, our real world plague to shame. Basically, two versions of magical Black Death that went through the world that really people couldn't deal with. So there were some really awful things that happened that dropped the world's population by a lot. And as much as we can say the world's population could recover, the world is not the same as it was. Certainly better medical technology, but it's a much more violent and deadly world than ours. So unnatural death has increased exponentially. You know, people talk about the various bad things and stuff that happen throughout the world. Yeah, no. Population might be recovering, but there's just so much stuff going on in the Shadowrun world that any kind of population recovery would be slow. And they're certainly not going to get to our level anytime soon with a lot of the way that things are happening. So, again, thinking along those lines, having a very high populated area where you have about 750 inhabitants per square kilometer is a lot of people. And it is the second smallest state in the UCAS after Rhode Island. So Rhode Island still has that distinction. Thanks, Rhode Island. Anyway. So yeah. With that over 4 million population, about 2/3 are normal Homo sapien sapien, basic humans. About 13% are elves, 2% are dwarfs, so not that many dwarfs. 16% are orcs, 2% are trolls, and 1% other things like Sasquatch, which we talked about in previous episodes. A lot of the education and things like corporate affiliation depends on the district you're in. They do have access to a lot of the basic grids and stuff. It is a state, and it has been basically considered a state since 2017. Remember, alternate timeline. When it became a state, it got a governor, a state legislation, 2 senators, 6 representatives that go for it. Any federal law applies to it. With one exception for this one, because it is so separated out from the rest of the mainline UCAS and is a major power in the UCAS, they've been granted a special responsibility by the Congress of the UCAS that they can do individual ambassadors to foreign countries. It's basically under the idea because they are separated out, and the UCAS is honestly, if something goes wrong, can't really do a lot. Them being able to do some of their own diplomatic relationships for the greater of their own state and the country is very important. Mercer Island is now known as Council Island, and is, if you look in the center, we'll zoom into it there. I'm just going to go back in there. Council Island in the center there. That actually has been succeeded to the South Side Council. Remember, South Side surrounds them. To basically used as a special embassy with them. Notable governors, Charles C. Lindstrom was elected mayor of Seattle in 2018 and then declared governor in 2020. Did remember it was around 2017 that it was changed to basically being a state, so it was an integration of things. Marlon Schultz was a mayor of Bellevue, was elected governor in 2039 until 2059. When they died, and there was a special election where Ivar J. Lindstrom was taken over until 2066. After 2066, Julius Struthers, a dwarf born in 2011, served until 2070, and then Kenneth Brackhaven, who was a 2057 presidential candidate, was elected governor in 2070 and served until 2078. So there's a little bit of the governors. The current districts are Auburn, Bellevue, Downtown Everett, Fort Lewis, Puyallup, Redmond, Renton, Snohomish, Tacoma, and by Proposition 23, which came about in the early 2070s, 2074, so I'm not going to be talking about as much about it a little bit, the Orc Underground became a main district. So I might talk about the Orc Underground, but not as a proper district when I talk about the book that I'm using. They haven't had an updated book since that one. There's also the Council Island and Outremer. Major corporate presences in here are, of course, the Federal Boeing, Renraku, with Renraku Arcology, Aztechnology, and Yametazu. You can still see the Space Needle. Of course, Renraku Arcology is there. Mount Rainier in the area, Federated Boeing, Everett's facilities, and the UCS supercarrier is oftentimes docked at the Everett Naval Shipyard. When it docks, that's where it docks. The other mega corporations that don't have as big a presence but do have some facilities in the area are Wuxing, Mitsuhama, Purston Enterprises, and the Rebel Network. Sports. Everybody loves sports. Do you want to know about Seattle's major sports teams? Well, they still have a baseball team in the Seattle Mariners, still. Basketball team is the Seattle Supersonics. The combat biker team is the Seattle Timberwolves. Football team, Seattle Seahawks, still there. Soccer team, Seattle Sounders FC for Major League Soccer. And the urban brawl team, the Seattle Screamers. So, still have those in there. Anyway. Look, you know, urban brawl, pretty famous. Anyway. So, major groups that you might find that are basically, hello, Ashton, beyond your much more criminal elements. Hey, the Mafia is still around. It was originally from Italy. It has a couple 100-year-old history. Maybe it's not as old as the Chinese Triads or Japanese Yakuza. It's got a rich history. It still exists. It did not die with the evolution of the Shadowrun world. And, you know, it still has a major operations within Seattle. So good for them. Yep. The Ancients, which are an elf go gang, largest in the world and one of the largest gangs in North America, have a powerful Seattle area. They are based out of that. They're basically political outcasts from Tarnagir. And as much as they are based out of Seattle, they have branches in a lot of major cities in the UCAS. And a few in the California state. Not as many. Basically, the Japanese presence in San Francisco nearly got rid of them from there. And, of course, the Cutters are another major gang that has a powerful situation in the UCS. There's a major Shadowland node in there, if you want to note for something for the Astral Plane. And other gangs that have been named and have had various success in Seattle. Just to note them are the Scatterbrains, Razorheads, Halloweeners, which I will note the Halloweeners if you want to have a little bit more dealing with them. The Shadowrun Genesis game, which is based out of Seattle, which is the one I played out of the two Shadowrun games. I haven't played the Super Nintendo one. Have to at some point in time. But the Halloweeners are a major gang in that one. Anyway, the Spiders, the Spikes, the Red Hot Nukes, and the Night Hunters are all gangs that have turf in the area and have had various ups and downs. So, there you go. And there's a bunch of novels that have been sort of official sources for giving information here. A lot of this stuff here shows up in actual books, like the sports information comes up from the book Shadowbeat. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. They're the Halloweeners. Like, yeah, they like the jack-o'-lantern motif, and their color scheme is orange and black, and a skull motif, a little bit of red too. So their symbol's a flaming jack-o'-lantern. Yep. They were nearly slaughtered by the ancients in 2069, but they rebuilt themselves during the 2070s. Though very few from the original section of that gang remains. It's been sort of its former glory, hard to say, but certainly it still exists as a major gang, or minor gang, I should really say, in because they only take over one. They only have influence on one. Yeah, I know, you made a joke. I destroyed that joke. Haha. Anyway. But that's basically what we have before we move on to the book as a whole. The 2072 book. So, let's talk about what's in that book and what what people out there should really know about for the city. So there's an airport. The Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, SeaTac, still exists. It's probably one of the best ways to travel into Seattle if you're coming from another area of the UCAS. Hey, turns out air travel is still the best way. If I wanted to get to, honestly, something like Puerto Rico, American Samoa, or some of the other territories that are controlled by the U.S., I would probably have to fly there. It just happens to be one of those things. So there aren't three major traffic routes into and out of Seattle with the Native American nations. There's one in the north, the south, and the east. Of course, those are directions. The north and the south follow the track of the old U.S. Interstate Highway 5. The east is the old I-90 that leads to the Yakima Trading Center in Ellsberg. So, there is a high-speed maglev train that runs from San Francisco to Seattle through Tierra-Marik and the Shilsash Council. It is basically the only passenger rail service to the metroplex. It takes 2 hours and is usually used for tourists and corporate employees. So it is very expensive. Sea is also an option, honestly. The port is one of the biggest ports, honestly, on the Pacific Coast still. Seattle has that power that even after everything that happened, because of a lot of the population and because it's managed to maintain itself a lot more than many of the other cities, it tends to be the largest, at least on North America, the largest trade hub. So there's a lot of visitors and things that come in through the port, honestly. Coming in by boat is an option. The place has no official language, of course. English is the basic language, but because of the mixing pot of a lot of things that have happened in the Shadowrun world, they don't have an official language anymore. Certainly things like Japanese, some of the Native American languages, Russian, Cantonese, Spanish, Elvish, or Orcish, the Seferial or the Ordzets are also major languages with the large Orc population, the Elven nation that's nearby. The influence that Japan has, and of course with Russia, China, and Spanish being from basically South America, still being major languages. You know, the languages which were large languages in our world still tend to be large languages in their world, even if they're alternate history. Just because a lot of population dropped doesn't mean there isn't a lot of people that still speak those. Of course, there is the UCS dollar is the main currency, but the Nuyen is also, the international Nuyen is very largely looked after there, and like in many places of the world, supplants the local dollar or local money, especially in places like here. The Nuyen is looked after a lot more. And so if you're going to look for prices, most of them are going to be in Nuyen. Though, online, if you go kind of into AR, or if you use AR, or go into the Matrix, you'll honestly... most of the time, most dragons are not a worry about. Honestly, yes, there are still the lesser dragons, which are probably an issue. Great dragons don't, well, usually don't do that anymore. Usually. Yeah, dragon fear, or any other mythical critter that has come into awakening, basically. So yeah, so honestly, hard currency is rare, though. So that's the other thing is, yes, it's going to be in Nuyen most likely, that the UCS dollar does exist. And there are still hard currencies. You know, you can get your Nuyens, your dollars, or corporate script if you're buying specifically out of a corporation and dealing with them. You can certainly get those, but online, electronic is the way to go, really. Honestly, having hard copy currency is required by certain businesses, especially small businesses, because it's a lot easier for them to control their finances that way. So a more, in quotations, mom and pop locations might ask for hard currency. So physical stuff. Annual precipitation is around 90 centimeters. A little more average for the northeastern UCIS. You know, so it still rains in Seattle a lot. Annual temperatures around 21 degrees Celsius, up to 31 in the summer, and down to 4.5 in the winter. So it doesn't really get below freezing there very often. It sometimes does, and usually when it comes to the freezing weather, the weather is mild. Thunderstorms during spring and summer, windstorms in autumn. Mount Rainier erupts a bunch. So it's just an active volcano. So the southern parts of the Metroplex often have ashfall, and you know, ash depositing in that area is an actual thing to deal with, and there might be air alerts with breathing masks, especially in the southern part, especially for visiting Lake Union. So be warned of volcano sometimes. So the Metroplex is hilly terrain. So, you know, if you're going to be walking around, be ready for that. That's one of the main things about it. I'm sure there's some very interesting way of going on about that. Man, it's Seattle. It's interesting. The Metro Transit Company, owned by the Metroplex government. So it is a company, which is one of those interesting things. Remember, it is a corporate world in Shadowrun. So having this company that is technically owned by the Metroplex government, but is separate, kind of, is a very interesting idea that runs the public transport system. The bus routes throughout the Metroplex, the schedules when available. There's no charge to ride the bus in downtown free zone. Trips outside downtown cost about 2 Nuyen. There's a monorail system that was been updated several times throughout the 100-year history. It loops the downtown district on elevated traps with stops at the Seattle Center, the ACHE, King Street Station, and many other places along, which costs about 1 Nuyen too. So they do have the monorail still in the area too. There are cars. Electric cars are the way to go in much of the Shadowrun world. They don't think about the same way that we think of electric cars. We think of electric cars with specific batteries. The way they do that is they have highways that are gridded for electric cars, and streets that are gridded for it. What does that mean? It means the vehicles that travel on it are connected up in a way, I can't really explain it well. They get their energy from traveling on these roads. They're basically built to travel on them. The grid guide system basically provides traffic flow. It's not that you can't get gas-powered cars, but it's been like, you know, another 50 years and massive amount of natural problems. Natural resources like gas are much more expensive and rarer. So getting a gas-powered vehicle does exist, but much rarer, and usually is for outside of the city travel, and you'd have to have someone that would be made, something that would be made for that. But there is some areas that doesn't exist in. Basically, the main metroplex is where the electric cars go to. You can cross the metroplex from Everett in the north to pull up in the south in about 3 hours if traffic is light. During rush hour, which usually lasts about 2 to 3 hours in the morning and evening, stop and go. If you're going to the Barrens, don't go electric. The guide grid system is often damaged or non-existent in that area. Travel on major highways or any section of the Barrens at late night is potentially dangerous. And check your local grid guide before traveling that area. There are taxi services. Emerald City cabs, the yellow cabs, and the grid cab, with the last one in which is a remote and GPS piloted vehicles. There's also some limo services and some express things from the airport, limos from the airport to downtown. Yeah, pollution spirit attacks just don't do well for that. It's much more an expensive thing. There's also the keycard franchises. You wave your keycard-enabled comlink over the dash or touch the virtual stick hovering outside and over the driver's side to unlock the car. It's basically a rent-a-car system that exists in various places that you can find key cars. Not that you couldn't steal from that, but anyway, there's also a ferry system. Hey, there's this big amount of water. So certainly by water you can travel. It costs about 5 million to take it for a passenger and 12 million for a vehicle. Larger vehicles might have more cost. So it's about 40 minutes to and from downtown, or 50 minutes by hydrofoil for basic ferry. Helicopters are also a thing. Many facilities have landing pads or tilt rotor aircraft, many smaller, lighter than aircraft and things like that. There are some taxi services that deal with that, with VTOLs and tilt rotors and stuff. It's much more expensive because it's a lot quicker and easier. About 100 million for a quick hop to the airport, 150 million for a cross-town flight. So it's expensive. It's there. So local law enforcement is contracted to Knight Errant. It's a private security company. So if you're dealing with that, the local law is corporal group that's been basically employed. So uniformed officers patrol the streets and answer to available emergency calls with a panic bucket system on comlinks or public terminals. If you have your panic button up to date, that is, on your comlink, which can call for emergencies. And there is surcharges for false alarms. So that is an important thing about it. You'll be charged for false alarm. Private security, on the other hand, that handles a lot of things like corporate properties or other private companies. It's the thing that was established early on in the history of Shadowrun. You'll have to deal with corporate security. Yeah, you will probably be warned. And honestly, you might enter an area where Knight Errant's services are not available. Either way. So, yeah. There's places where security jurisdiction is asked, and it might just be corpo security, which just means you're most likely more to get shot, and shot a lot. So, yep. Good thing about Seattle is there are state-of-the-art medical facilities. There's about 88 hospitals and clinics throughout the greater metroplex. It is the #1 in the UCS for trauma and emergency care, with some of the finest doctors in the entire nation. Again, remember, this is one of the most densely populated area, and some of the area that has actually fared some of the best for a lot of the upheavals. In a way, the situation that Seattle being cut off and allowed to kind of flourish on their own and made into this kind of treaty city, especially because a lot of people that left the Native American nations basically headed to Seattle, increasing the population from the sparse areas. You have to think, people went 2 directions. or 3 at the time, then the Native American nations were formed. A bunch went to California. A bunch went to, of course, east. But a bunch also went into Seattle. California became their own place. They had their own issues. East, people just spread out to places, honestly, when they were displaced, or kind of in both directions. Seattle has been Seattle. It helped it develop more. Downtown has the most with 12 hospitals. There's dock wagons, of course, and plenty of other situations for medical. Bellevue has 11. Tacoma has a bunch of operating one. Everett has 15. Renton has 13. Fort Lewis has 4. Snohomish has 8. Redmond and Poplar has 6. So there are places that have less. If you're looking for some media, of course, though they're physically separated from the rest of UCS, it is connected through the Matrix. Who would have thought? Being connected online means, they are connected with the rest of the country. So Newsnet is the major area to get a lot of the major news. There's the Independent Information Network, Newsnet Incorporated, and KSAF Incorporated, which are places to find your news. Between the 3 of them, you're bound to get at least a general idea of what's going on. At least there are some competing levels of local news. If you upgrade your Comlink preference for delivery, you can get local news, alerts and information, or breaking stories if you're connected to the news through your Comlink. So choose the type of news you get. Of course, there is a lot of entertainment to be found in Seattle. Plenty of art. With the Native American nations, there's a lot of tribal influence in art, Elven, Asian artistic styles, from a lot of the influence from, of course, the rise of Japanese power in the Pacific. So a lot of these styles do come into the area here. There's things like traditional wood carvings, paintings, and sculptures. Modern digital and virtual art also exists. So art can take the form of physical or electronic very easily, and there's a lot of it in the time. And there's even a lot of performances, Shakespearean plays, Japanese kabuki, ballet, more modern codified poetry and drama readings and stuff like that. There's a lot of art. There's also thriving lots of music. Electric blend with Soho coffee artists, Elven jazz, rock fusion, shag and speed metal, orc beats, First Nation influenced chants and dance, just to name a few. And there's various clubs that you can go visit if you want to enjoy it. Speaking of clubs, there's a massive amount of nightlife that happens. Lots of bars, clubs, and places. Downtown is the hot spot with places like Dante's Inferno, and Underworld 93 being another major fixture. Some places that are like on the edge of Redmond and Polyp. I talked about all the sports teams, so plenty of them. But remember, remember our Mariners, the baseball team we talked about? Well, the Portland Lords from Turning have a long-running rivalry with the Mariners. And so grudge matches between the Lords and Mariners are a sellout event. Turns out, baseball, no matter what, is still just weirdly popular. But a lot of the other ones continue things like Seahawks, the Supersonics. Those teams that were existed during our version of the world still exist there, along with other teams that happen. Of course, the Tacoma Dome hosts the Timberwolves, the combat biker team, and the also Seattle Screamers, the urban brawl team. So there are plenty of places to go check out sports if you're still interested in that also. Being a crossroad between the Elven, Native American, UCS, and Asian peoples blends a lot of culture here. As much as the old United States was a mixing pot, certainly with the changes that have happened in the last 50 years, that happens a lot less. There's a lot less of this mixing pot nature, with borders closed a lot more, and a lot more difficult to traverse with everything that's happened. On the other hand, Seattle has actually become more of that mixing pot. So that's another reason that it's a very unique place. The old U.S. way of a mixing pot still exists here. Granted, the Anglo-American values and traditions are still the backbone of the metropolitan complex. It still exists there from our time period. But a lot more elements from other countries and places are being kind of brought in there. So the major neighbor to, of course, Seattle is the South City Council. It is one of the Native American nations that was formed after the Treaty of Denver, and they still have Seattle still has a really good friendly terms with both the council and South Shios. And the thing is, that's what they've done very good. And they use Council Island to keep diplomatic missions heavy. There are visitor visas that are available up for day trips or short visits to the Native American nations to enjoy the wilderness and local cultures and stuff like that. So, the fact is, they do that very well. It's another reason that their independent ability to negotiate has been very powerful. Tarnaga, the Elven nation, which is to the south, has also been a very valuable trading part of the metroplex. By kind of recognizing them and doing a lot of trade with them, not only they're bringing specifically Elven culture out, but they're also basically allow for easy trips in amongst them both ways. So there's a lot of places like you can get Elven cuisine, Elven memory gardens show up in Seattle. You have to remember that magic comes back in cycles. This is the Sixth World. Discoveries of ancient magical text and information have allowed elves to rebuild a culture that they have found out about. Basically, they're like, hey, this is our ancient culture. We're rebuilding it. They've been doing that for decades now. Rebuilding an ancient culture that they discovered that they're members of. And Tarnagag, and the one in Ireland whose name eludes me right now, if anybody wanted to say in the comments or anything, I'm okay with that. Those nations have been developing an elven identity. Anyway. So. Let's talk about we're going to just use the districts at a glance. I know a little bit more details in these districts, but if you want to get a copy of Seattle 2072 in PDF form, it's cheap online. I have a copy of it. I'd recommend checking that out to get an idea on some of these areas. I'm just going to kind of go over the various districts. Of course, downtown. It's Seattle City. It's the heart of the Metroplex. It's the main business district. Got most shops, parks, theaters, museums, hotels, restaurants. It's got the waterfront, markets, popular attractions. It's got the Space Needle still there. It's got the most diverse cultures. There's the International District with the Elven District, the Orc Underground, and the Capitol Hill neighbors, with Orc Underground, of course, being its own district now, to note, as after 2072. It was 2074 when that happened. There's the Arcology Commercial and Housing Enclave, formerly known as Renraku Arcology. One of the world's largest buildings, as well as the spectacular Ass Technology Pyramid, which is in town. I wonder if I can pop up an image of this stuff. The Seattle... I think I can do a Seattle image. Let me check it here. I can open an image and have it pop up. Sorry, just taking a second here because I want to pop up an image and let's have it do. Yeah. Oh, yeah, Of course, it's not sized correctly. Whatever. That's what I get for using a pre-existing thing. But here's one of the images of Seattle. Does this navigate them? Ah, there we go. Through some Shadowrun images that I end up having. But, yeah. that's just to give you an idea of those places. Anyway, some Seattle skyline, which I did have, which ended up being part of the stuff I have. So downtown, there's a lot to offer. It is probably the most, it's the nicest area, honestly, of town. It's the core of the state. Of course, we have to its east, let me just do some zoom in here, is Bellevue. So it's across Lake Washington from the downtown district. It's a retreat of the white-collar community from Seattle. The area's wooded hills and lakesides are a very popular place, even post-awakening. It's got a lot of manicured parks and condoplexes. It has some air of natural beauty and architectural beauty still. It's got a very elegant shopping and business district. It also is the electronics is the main industry of the area here. Matrix hardware and software boutiques are big here. Some fine fashion designers and places like that. Of course, then we move on to Tacoma, which is farther down south here, south of downtown. I have to remember what I have to click on for each of these. It was once considered the poorer southern cousin to Seattle as a city. Its heavy industry had jokes about it with the aroma and stuff. But when the metroplex formed, it was considered a technological and economic development area. So preserve the charming turn-of-the-century downtown area. It's got a busy dock area, new corporate business centers, and the main attraction is downtown, various shopping center, including Tacoma Mall and Vila Plaza. If you arrive to the Metroplex via bullet train, you'll disembark at Charles Royer Station and can spend an afternoon exploring Tacoma before you move on to your other destinations throughout Seattle. So you can easily also catch the train south to San Francisco, or an air taxi arrive to SeaTac Airport from here. Yeah. So there is also a major monument here. The Crying Wall, which is a monument to metahuman victims during the infamous Night of Rage, created by dwarf and orc sculptors. So yeah. Let's talk about Everett. Everett, which is all the way into the north. It's the northernmost district of Seattle. It's known for its ships, planes, and stormy weather. It's the northern part of the Puget Sound. It borders rural Snohomish and the Southwest Council lands. It's home to the Everett Shipyards, a major UCS Navy place, and Federated Boeing's aircraft construction facility. So one of the major corporate location there. It does have some nice rainforest vistas and hiking trails because of the Snohomish River cutting through part of the area. Renton. Let me just make sure we're pointed at Renton, then, which is kind of in this center there, Renton. It has a reputation as a sleepy bedroom suburb of the Metroplex. It has a pleasant environment, combining natural beauty with modern extra communities. Full retail, shopping centers, special boutiques, high-end things. Features a spur of green hills and ridges, include the Cougar Mountains and Tiger Mountains, along with a small amount of lake mountains. I really am selling these as like I love that they sells them like in the book as like a tourist destination. I really do, and I'm like selling it as that. Auburn's the industrial heart of Seattle. Many of the factories, refineries, and other manufacturing plants are here. It's a blue-collar district. There's local attractions and entertainment. The minor league baseball teams and urban brawl teams, the Auburn Cardinals and Auburn Rumblers. The Seattle International Railway is here. Restaurants, bars, and nightclubs. But it is a more blue-collar area. Snohomish, which is in the north. Kind of go up to. Snohomish. I'll never pronounce that right. Snohomish is known for urban sprawl. Seattle's not without its greener pastures. Not without known for its sprawl. It's the breadbasket of the metroplex. It's got aquaculture and agro-business farms along the Snohomish River, the surrounding countryside. It makes Seattle farm country an ideal place to visit for a getaway from the metroplex. Picnic lunch, one of the restaurants or food co-ops. Dining for gourmands is a fun place to do. And of course, Blackstone's Museum and Zoo, a privately owned attraction with various paranormal animals. Most of them free-range natural habitats provide fun for children and adults alike. There are comments in here which are from like actual runners about things that are going on here, but I'm going to leave those if you want to read up on the actual things about these places to you. I'm going over for the tourist destination. Of course, there is, if we head farther south, Fort Lewis. It is treated as another district in the greater Seattle Metroplex. It is a UCS military reservation, housing the Seattle Metroplex Guard, McCord Airfield, and the USCS Army Pacific Command Joint Task Force Seattle. Much of the area is restricted, though there are some tours of certain military facilities. So if you wanted to check one out, the Fort Lewis Public Relations Center you could contact for information. The zoological gardens are the main attraction here in Fort Lewis, though. Acres of managed wilderness and well-established trails and habitats with a wide variety of paranormal animals. Invisible ultrasonic fences and AR tabs keep the animals in their established habitats and allow visitors to see them in their natural environments. You can spend a day or more walking the garden, seeing an impressive collection which changes slightly year-round. They are cooperative. They work cooperatively with Blackstone Zoo and Snohomish as well, loaning out parts of their collections. The two work together. Redmond. Of course, we are already at the area. Redmond's inland north. Looking for something a little different this style experience, head down the 405 and exit at Redmond for a walk on the wild side. Local authorities and USS travel advisors warn against going far off the beaten track in this district of the Metroplex. Along the 405 boarding Bellevue, you can find some of the most exciting night spots. Other corporate businesses run by local residents, some dating back 30 years. Just check the night errand traffic report and activities update on the night watch before making your plans. Yeah, Redmond's not a tourist destination. Just saying. It's the city proper. Puyallup District. The main eruption of Mount Rainier is in 2017 and devastated much of the district down there. Lava flows, heavy ash from the volcano changed the course of the Puyallup River, wiping out real estate, creating vast lava plains that now cover the area. There's occasional tremors, geysers, ash falls from the still active volcano. As they call it, smoking Rainier looms over the horizon. Hiking and camping can be on the lava flats, but you have to sign a special waiver due to the geysers, boiling mud, and similar hazard. Basically, if you want to go camping in that area, you have to sign a waiver that's like, I know this is very dangerous and I could very easily die horribly for camping in this area. There's Hell's Kitchen's tours, Ashland Air, provide views of the lava field and geysers on clear days. There's the Council Island. This is basically, again, a taste of the culture and history of the Native American nation, right on the Metroplex doorstep. It's on Lake Washington. The Treaty of Denver seceded the island when the Native American nations formed in 2018. Remember, I'm talking about, this is 2072. This is 54 years later, and the current timeline in Shadowrun takes place nearly another decade after here. So that's quite a while away that this has been here. So it's an embassy and tribal enclave in the Seattle Metroplex. The South Sealy Council maintains the island as a nature preserve, allowing visitors to enjoy unspelt wilderness along the display of Native American culture. And you have to get some passes from the Grand Council Lodge through there. Not all the districts. Did I miss one? Puyallup, Tacoma, Auburn? We talked about Auburn. Did I somehow miss Auburn? I know I got Auburn. Man, just for some reason I was thinking I forgot Auburn. Poor Auburn. It's just the industrial area. Yeah. So, there you go. So, we should talk, now that we haven't established what 2072 tourist Seattle's like. Let's talk the history of Seattle briefly. Again, there will be a lot more that I will not go into about these things. I'll probably hit the districts up a little bit more before we finish today. But I just want to go over a lot of the basics. Again, if you want to dive deeper into this is just giving you an idea of the city and what's in the city and what's it like there. So, tech industry has been a big part of it, of this area, of course. And certainly with the Siwase decision of 1999, changed things in the turn of the 20th century. Seattle was developing itself a lot more. And there was, during this time period, a burgeoning sovereign American Indian movement within the territories there, the SAM. In 2010, though, there was the Lone Eagle incident, an attack by SAM terrorists. The reservations were seized. Their inhabitants went to native re-education centers. Then the VTAS, the virally induced toxic allergy syndrome, which killed about a quarter of the world's population, occurred. So then there was the earthquake in 2011 that rocked the Olympian Peninsula, toppling buildings, especially those of the Indian re-education centers. A breakout occurred. Yeah. And Thunder Tai, the South chief and close friend of Daniel Howland Coyote, who I talked about in my history video, we basically had the guerrilla warfare against the United States government from that location. And, of course, then in 2011, the first great dragon, Ryumyo, was taken pictures of. And then, of course, elves and dwarfs were being born. We then get to the Great Ghost Dance War. I've talked about it before. Mount St. Helens, Mount Hood, Mount Rainier, and Mount Adams all erupted simultaneously. Yeah. The Trade of Denver was signed, and Seattle basically became what it was. So the Shining Tree of Denver, thousands of U.S. citizens living on the Native American nations had to give up the rights to land ownership and move back to the new UCS borders, or remain on the Native American land as minority citizens. The Sovereign Tribal Councils passed a resolution outlawing reprisal against people who chose to stay and made citizenship available to anyone who could prove any Native American ancestry and was willing to follow tribal law and customs. But it didn't deny plans to relocate natives into reservations. So basically, they did say some nice things, but they said, hey, we're going to put you into reservations. So a lot of refugees poured out of the new tribal lands, a lot into Seattle. That's what I was talking about. East United States and California had a lot, had enough resources to cope barely with the sudden influx of people. Seattle and those cities did not. Basically, 250,000 refugees arrived into the area by 2019. Highways were packed for days. Refugee camps filled up. Basically, Seattle, the metroplex, the Seattle downtown, was using Tacoma, Everett, and the smaller subsidy for all the aid. And it was basically a nationwide crisis that occurred. So this switching and influx of people between these different territories just created issues. And that's when, of course, Charles Lindstrom was elected mayor in 2018. His greatest wish was to make Emerald City the capital of the West, basically economically. Effectively, his radical ideas didn't really work, though, with the influx of a lot of people. The suburban infrastructure was too weak to handle the problem. So Belleville, Renton, Kent, all became part of Greater Seattle. So effectively, the Metroplex was still separate cities, even with the Treaty of Denver. The Treaty of Denver just set this area aside with Seattle and its basically sister cities, the connected cities around it, were a territory that was still UCS. It was 2019 and this influx of refugees that caused them to need to kind of band together to one basic state government. So all of King County, Pierce and Snohomish counties as well were all part of the greater metroplex. Everett, Tacoma, had no hope of remaining independent because of these things. So effectively, each of the districts was almost their own city before. And becoming districts of Seattle as a whole, as this city-state, almost you could call it, was part of this. People kept flooding in. They could not deal with it. Yeah. So it was by September 6, 2019, that the Seattle city government controlled basically all the land that Native American nations had given to the U.S. government as part of the treaty. So then it was on November 16th, 2020, that President William Jarham signed a resolution dissolving the state of Washington and recognizing the Seattle Metroplex as Seattle Lindstrom as its first governor. Basically, Washington as a state dissolved, because Washington as a state would have been Seattle and those cities as what was left over. But because of the refugee situation and all of these smaller cities couldn't deal with it, and they band together to one big government to try to handle it all, there was a recognition that Washington state was basically dead. It was one big city, and it is the Seattle Metroplex, its own state then at that point in time. It's this interesting idea that, people flooding in, which there still is the leftovers of those people flooding in, with it being such a populated area. Of course, then on 2021, April 30th was Goblinization Day, which had plenty of its own eras, problems happening. There was rumors of transformations might be contagious. Lindstrom had the Metroplex Guard round up a lot of the metahumans and their families, detain them in camps that once held the Native American nations. It was proven not to be contagious by the end of the year. By 2022, 15 months after that day, all the metahumans were released from quarantine. Lindstrom spoke of being united under peace, but in late 2022, race riots erupted throughout the Metroplex, with the police force basically not being able to handle it. 2023, the police department went on strike. Lindstrom declared the strike illegal, fired all of the Seattle Police Department. Then at the time, Lone Star Security Services, a private corporation, was hired to take over as the security of Seattle. And were for a long time. And a lot of members of the SPD, the defunct members that had applied to work at Lone Star, they lost their seniority in the process, or one of the other private security firms, the Metroplex. It was certainly a change. There was a second wave of VTAS, of course. Killed more people. And though Lone Star did a job keeping law and order, it was that second wave of VTAS that basically people put their differences aside and worked together. As many as Goblinization had touched, that many lives were lost, basically. All the major religions denounced racism as a hateful and ignorant thing in the past, and the only hardcore elements on both sides of the racial divide kept the conflict alive. But basically all the major religions of the world were like, you know what? We're all one people. Let's just deal with it. We're having massive amounts of global plagues. Things have gone to shit with natural disasters and stuff. Let's not deal with this. Lindstrom retired in 2028. A media personality, Charles Cross, replaced him. A lot of policies stayed the same. Of course, then, that was 2028. 2029 is the crash of 29. where the crash virus just destroyed the internet and the Matrix had to be born out of it. At least the first version of the Matrix. 2036, of course, the Night of Rage, which, again, I talked about. It was basically Vic the Quick took over in 2036, a combat biker from the Tacoma Timberwolves. He rode a wave of human conservationism into office. So, said some pretty horrible things, like orcs and trolls make great offensive combat bikers, but don't have much brains for anything else. It sparked riots throughout Seattle because of its high metahuman population, leading to crackdowns from Lone Star and the government's order, more violence, terrorism, and all culminated in 2039 on the night of February 7th. The Seattle Metroplex Guard was ordered under Governor Allison to round up all metahumans and sensors, transport them directly under armed guard to a series of warehouses along the waterfront, where they were deported from camps to San Francisco to improve racial harmony in the Metroplex. So this is pretty awful that was going on. With the majority of the city's metahumans herded to these places, fear became hysteria. One of the buildings came screams, gunfire, explosions, panic. Fire erupted. The death toll was staggering, and though many metahumans have escaped through the sewer systems, violence triggered throughout the innocents throughout the Metroplex in days to come. It was the Night of Rage. Governor Allison, there was a huge outcry against him, demand for investigation. Protesters gathered in front of the police stations and government buildings, calling for resignation of every guards member who stood by and refused to act while so many perished. The community used every opportunity to disavow all of the governor's administration. Rumors surfaced that he was actually a member of Hands of Five, a humanist polyclub. Yeah. And though Allison refused to deny any wrongdoing, on February 11th, 4 days later, he was found shot to death in his office. The mystery of how he died never resolved. Marilyn Schultz, the Mayor of Bellevue, won a special election, chose a successor by a surprisingly large margin. It was apparently clinched for nominations. Report that she had been one of the first officials to appeal to the UCC for help during the Night of Rage. The new governor gave Lone Star an ultimatum: arrest leaders of Hands of Five or face breach of contract. Lone Star turned out in force to hunt down the terrorists. The next 7 days become the Week of Sirens. Countless raids by Lone Star forces. Within days, the Hands of Five leaders were either dead or behind bars. Night of Rage will be remembered. There's a memorial to it. A terrible thing that happened. Blow my nose. Pretty good today. Not very... In 2045, the Universal Brotherhood opened up its first chapter in Seattle. They had been there in California 2 years earlier. The idea of Universal Brotherhood with all metahumans and stuff like that. So, in 2051, it was revealed that the Universal Brotherhood was not good. It was a actually cover for work in different insect spirits, insect shamans to capture humans and metahumans in hopes for a growing hive. The two reporters that discovered it were killed, but their research survived, and the Brotherhood's operations was revealed. Several years, the Brotherhood, what it was doing was kept out of the public. A lot of people were killed for it. But in 2054, the USAF government learned of it, that this charitable organization was not so charitable. And basically, Project Hope, which was part of the Brotherhood, was to recruit homeless and conversion into insect spirits. The hive in Seattle was destroyed and outlawed the Brotherhood, basically. Basically, government and corporate forces combined got the situation under control. Because it turns out, corporates don't like insect spirits too. So all the corporations in the area banded together with the government to basically be like, let's eliminate the threat. Very secretly. Night Errant's Firewatch team discovered the hive under Chicago. Insect spirits boiled out of the ruins, though, for that one happened. So the Chicago containment zone was formed around that time. Chicago has been processed. 2057. So UCS President James Booth won the election in 2056 of landslide. It was then revealed that the remote vote system had been compromised. The results were fraudulent. The election was declared null and void. The Speaker of House, Betty Jo Pickard, was appointed pro-term government by Congress. Conducted investigation, and a special election was scheduled for 2057. Wow. There is election fraud on the highest degree. It can happen, but, it was discovered. Actually discovered. Election scandal polarized the already agitated UCAS political spectrum and brought many new candidates out to compete for the office. Dunkelzane, the dragon, basically declared his candidacy right then and there. One candidate from Seattle was Kenneth Brockhaven, a local businessman, traditional values platform he run over. He was actual son of Charles Brockhaven, perished after Globalization Day, and was replaced by an imposter. Huh. Oh no, the actual son of Charles Brockhaven was perished on. So okay. So he was a fake, but that was revealed. Oh, and though the thing is, he did confess to it and give revealed his true past, and actually the story he told was enough to get some support behind him. He was like, I became, Kenneth Brockhaven. Here's my sad story. Why? The Republican candidate, Franklin Yates, was murdered in Seattle hotel room by an insect spirit possessing an FBI agent. There was a lot more concern over insect spirits because, Chicago had happened. Annie Polchek took over in their friend's place and made a valiant but ultimate futile showing in the polls because of, didn't have the same charisma. I'll buy water like Blaze asked me to. Dunkelzane won. He was elected and then assassinated on inauguration night. And Vice President Kyle Hafner was sworn in as president. Riots came across the nation, including Seattle, because of the death of President Dunkelzane. Martial law was declared. The UCS military forces, aided by corporate security forces, maintained reestablished order. The Metroplex Guard was mobilized to quell the riots in Seattle, boosted by the UCS military. And of course, President Hafner tried to quell the anger by saying they would carry on Dunkelzane's chains for peace and prosperous UCS. There was a mafia war that happened, the mob war, in 2058. Don James O'Malley of the Seattle Mafia was killed outside his home by an unknown assassin. Don's successor was his daughter, Vernoa, a woman in her 20s. Yeah. There was some question about an untried girl basically in charge of the regime of the family. And especially when she was facing enemies like a powerful one in the Seattle Yakuza. But they decided to wait and see how the dust would settle the Metropolis before handing out a decision. So basically, Verona O'Malley was thrown to the wolves to see if she could survive with her father's death. But there was a power struggle within Seattle between the three major families of the Metroplex against each other. Mob war went on for about a year before the Commission finally decided the possibility of seeing complete control of the operation was too big of a great risk. They chose Maurice, the Butcher of Bingo, as new John of Seattle, charged with keeping operations out of the hands of the Yakuza. the same as James O'Malley and his brother Brian before him. Roland O'Malley was recognized as the Kappa of the Finnegan family and circled the wagons to regroup her plan's next move. There's also corporate conflict during the same time as the Mafia conflict. Renraku Computer Systems was tearing up the markets, which they were having some rapid rise. Basically, the former head of internal security for Fuchi was on the Renraku's board of directors, and basically coming into Renraku boosted it up. Fuchi was split between three main factions. The president and CEO of Fuchi, but the market loss to Renraku had a Japanese faction. Basically, the the non-Japanese faction of Fuchi was kind of like having trouble. The market share to Renraku, the Japanese factions uniting against him because it was the Vilners, the Yamada, and then the Kotomi. So Vilners was the president and CEO, one of the factions, but the two Japanese factions basically opposed him against Renraku. And Miles Lanier, who was the one who went over to Renraku, was Fuchi's ace in the hole. But he left to take a position on Renraku. Basically, corporate thing going on. Anyway, God, that's a complexity that probably we don't actually get to go into. We can talk about the Renraku shutdown, because 2059... So Renraku scored a major public relations coup in the corporate conflict that turned into a nightmare for the Corp. The Renraku Ecology project in Seattle, the vast money pit for years, had finally been completed. The Corp made a media event unveiling the ambitious project, but a few weeks after the completion ceremonies, the arcology went into complete lockdown. Designers created it to be existing independent from the rest of the metroplex. It was built to grow its own food, produce its own waste, generate its own power, provide the daily needs of its basically 100,000 inhabitants. So in a morning, it severed all connections to the outside world. Blast doors closed off the entrances and exits, and the Renraku intranet and host went offline. Magical wards sprang up around the outside of the buildings, and no one was able to get in and out. The 100,000 were sealed inside the arcology, along with Governor Schultz, who was meeting with the Renraku Seattle president, Sherman Hang, at the time. So this was a big thing. There's confusion, frustration. People wanted to know what was going on. Renraku stonewalled as long as they could, but within hours it became clear they had no idea what was going on. They had also lost contact with everybody in the arcology. The place had been hijacked, taken over by force. The mayor of downtown Seattle, Ivor Lindstrom, called the emergency powers to mobilize the Metropolitan Guard. They surrounded arcology and looked for a way inside. As Renraku mobilized their own troops to also assist. Lindstrom refused the aid and made it clear that no corporate troops were to land in Seattle. Renraku protesters and trenches rose, finally waiting to see the Meg Corporation do. Renraku agreed to limit their personal to technical support and advisory roles in Seattle for the rescue operation at this point in time. Guard couldn't find a way in. All the buildings' main systems built to withstand small-scale nuclear war were on full alert, and automated systems forced them to keep their distances. The passcodes and overrides were changed. They couldn't reach the people trapped inside or communicate with them. Mayor Lindstrom and the United Corporate Council decided the arcology was off limits. The Metropolitan sort of a cordon around as experts tried to penetrate the building. So Governor Schultz, being trapped in there, there was an emergency election was scheduled to choose a new governor of the Metroplex. All districts' mayors were eligible, and Ivor Lindstrom, the mayor of downtown Seattle, and son of Governor Charles Lindstrom, seen as the father of the Seattle Metroplex, was basically the hero of the hour and very easily won the election. So the problem is that there was a lot of work cut out for him. It took 2 years for the UCS military forces under the command of Joint Task Force to reclaim the arcology from rogue artificial intelligence that seized control of it with considerable loss of life. It no sooner had been declared complete that Lindstrom research and Marshall faced, and the world faced a new challenge. Basically, an AI took control of Renraku arcology and basically held people there for years. 2 years to break in there and rescue what was remainder of those people. 2 years. Hale's Comet returned in 2061 with new awakening events around the world. With the Surge was, of course, the most significant. You had the changelings appear. You know, racial resentment kind of popped up some more violence in the world. Seattle feared a repeat of the Night of Rage, but the UCS Military Joint Task Force increased vigilance, and part of the Lone Star and the Metropolitan Guard helped contain the outbreaks of violence. Of course, then we had, in 2063, Matrix Crash, or the Crash 2.0. Everything crashed again. Lindstrom administration declared martial law, with Lone Star once again in the Joint Task Force of Seattle, basically trying to maintain things with the, you know, another huge internet crash, or this time the Matrix crash. In cooperative NeoNet, Seattle became the ideal testbed for the Wireless Matrix Initiative. They replaced a network that would be brought online only a matter of months. In spite of initial bumps in launch, the initiative was completely successful, and Seattle embraced the Matrix 2.0. Basically like nowhere else was going to. An example to the rest of the world. Basically, making them the potential standard for global reconstruction after the crash. There were those affected by IPS, the artificially induced psychopathic schizophrenia syndrome, after the 2.0. Again, Ghost in the Machine, as people basically were hooked in when the Matrix crashed. Caused a lot of issues. Dump shock and things like that, strokes. It's a new world order for 2070s and beyond, then, for Seattle at that point in time. But certainly we know Lone Star has been replaced in the 2080s by then. That's a story for a different day. So, what's left of the Renraku arcology? Well, the arcology commercial and housing districts, because we're going to talk a little bit more about... do we want to talk a little bit more about downtown and stuff? I can just mention what's in all these. Let's keep this simple. So downtown Seattle, major areas you can visit in the within the major districts and divisions within the downtown, of course, is the commercial arcology and housing enclave. What's left of the Renraku arcology, basically recommissioned. Renraku doesn't own it anymore after what happened, you know, but it has been liberated and basically taken over. The Ballard, it's a middle upper class neighborhood centered on Market Street. Capitol Hill, of course, capital of the entire area. The Elven District. It's the area where many of the elves and dwarfs of Seattle settled in after the Night of Rage. So it's now a very unique metahuman district there. The International District, of course, is there. Several different Asian cultures over the years. So it exists there too. The Orc Underground. Exists and is actually its own area now to define it. So that's a separate thing that happened more recently. Seattle Center, University District, and there's some places of interest that you could always look up for this. Like a place like the Space Needle and stuff. There's a lot on, like, if you wanted to check out different locations. Honestly, again, I think I shouldn't dive too deep into it. I think that's pretty good for there. I could talk about a lot of locations that are in downtown Seattle and stuff like that. But I gotta be honest, I've kind of given a good estimation on the basics. Outremer. We can talk about Outremer. I think that's the best place to go to. There is more stuff in all these locations. I gave the tourist kind of information on them, but certainly if you want to use Seattle, and it's a very interesting place, you can kind of check it out. Outremer, which forms Banbridge Island, Vashon Island, Fox Island, Anderson Island, McNeil Island. Basically, it's all the islands that are around the area there. So, the Emerald City is something to mention, though, because Seattle was the first to adopt an augmented reality view with the use of Emerald City motif, transforming the structures and streets of metropolitan districts into glittering emerald towers and golden avenues for the amusement of visitors and residents alike. In accordance with the WM1AR modes standards, the AR view conforms to the physical placements of structures in the occupied space, allowing people to operate in this mode to safely navigate. Basically, AR, augmented reality, and having like this, like the entire idea that you have either like replacement eyes for cyber eyes, or you have like glasses or goggles on, or something that allows you basically to see in the real world virtual stuff. The way that Seattle does it is it makes everything kind of connected together a lot of times. The AR view conforms with physical structures, but the AR views allow you to, like, you know, if I see a shop, I can check what they have for sale and their kind of prices from outside the shop and kind of stuff like that. AR is big. I don't think I've talked a little bit about this since I talked about my 4th edition visuals, 4th edition videos on YouTube many years ago. But the idea that the diving into the Matrix is the only way that you can get like virtual information. The AR that is overlaid on all of the Shadowrun world allows you to get so much more information if you accept it. You can like switch on and off AR, and the idea that like, yeah, Seattle has a big like specialty ones, the Emerald City one, which certainly you can kind of see and understand for fun. We mentioned that there's the Metropolitan Guard, the Joint Task Force Seattle. There's intelligence agencies within it. The Dracovin administration was the one that was in 2072. I don't know if it's been replaced since then. So the Metropolitan Guard, of course, is like kind of the National Guard. The Joint Task Force Seattle is basically the military. There is with the federal building there and stuff, there is FBI, drug enforcement agencies, national security agencies, internal revenue services, all within the metroplex there. Of course, they've got their own federal relationships with things like Aslan, the California Free State, Japan, Korea, the Native American nations, Ternag, United Canadian American States. You can look into that. It's like, because they're geologically separated, they are technically part of the UCAS, but certainly it's sort of like a love-hate relationship with your mother country. It's like you're part of it, but you're your own thing too. But they're not enough to like go independent. But you can look into their collections with other foreign relationships, of course. There are still many polyclubs out there. Polyclubs are basically special interest group politics parts. Like the human polyclubs are very human first. That's almost only one example. There's like the Orcs Rights Commission, Humanist, Empowerment Coalition, Sons of Sauron. They're all there. There's social religious groups. Children of the Dragon, the Church of the Whole Earth, the Gestalt Consciousness Network, the People of the Book. There are magical groups there. The Bear Doctor Society, Hermetic Order of Aurak Aurora, Illuminates of the New Dawn, Mystic Crusaders, United Talismongers Association, the Sisterhood, group of women that the Wild Seattle is also something that exists. There's plenty of critters, including toxic critters too. Yay. The United Corporate Council is present. Of course, you've Ares Macro Technology, AS Technology. Under Ares, this Knight Errant Security Services is also one that's there, which is now technically taken over there. Evo has some influence there. Horizon Group, Mishima Computer Technologies, Neonet. Renraku still has some, even though their ecology was kind of gone. State of Corrupt Prime, Regency Metamorphos, Shiwase, Universal Omnitech, Telstra Industrial Corporation, Wuxing. There are some specific Seattle corporations to talk about with Brackhaven Investments, Dockwagon, Emerald City Graphics, which helped with the Emerald City AR. Dockwagon, which is actually pretty... It is now out of Atlanta, but its presence in Seattle has been pretty big as a non-major one. ET Engineering, Federal Boeing, Gaiatronics, CASAF, Lone Star Security Services, which is kind of on the way out, Middledeck Industries, Fireman Communications, Stackraft United Oil, Vision Crafters, Vision Quest Entertainment. And there's, of course, a mass amount of Underworld, which we'll kind of go over. We loosely mentioned the Yakuza are pretty big. They are. And they have a bunch of branches there. The Mafia, of course, with the Finnegan family. Basically, I think the idea is that the European Mafias kind of joined together, I guess is the best way to say it. Basically, the Finnegan family was an Irish mob brought into the Mafia in the 1950s. The Carnello family and the Gianoli family are the big ones there. The Triads have a pretty big code there. The Vorivok, Subcucal Rings are two other major groups. Wasea, the Elven Mafia. Seattle Gangs, of course, I talked about the Ancients, the Cutters, and the second tier of 4 or 5 Hellhounds, Blood Mountain Boys, Colids, Crips and Crush, Disassemblers, First Nations, Halloweeners, Archka, the Spikes. Of course, you do have some third tier, which I'm not going to even mention them. Some specialty gangs, which we don't really need to talk about them right now. And there's plenty of things in the shadows to talk about for Seattle. For Dixers, Mr. Johnsons, and your connections as an actual Shadowrunner. There's smuggling, and hooding, and things like that. A lot of things like that. And 2076 was going to have the Seattle Olympics there. 2076 there was is the Metroplex bid to do the 2076 Summer Olympic Games. You know, hey, there we go. And an election cycle and stuff like that, and things that they talk about that, you know, Knight Errant is in over Lone Star, you know, taking over. Yep. So that is all that we need to talk about for Seattle for today. God, I went through a bunch, and hopefully you learned enough about Seattle. That last bit there was a little run-on, but it's like a little bit of extra information on Seattle. I think what I hit upon was mostly important, like the history, some basic information on the districts. There's a lot more to districts, a lot more to see in these districts, and I recommend getting the book if you want to dive deeper into them, because it would be too much for one video or a bunch of videos to go on about Seattle. I don't need to. But it is a place with a lot of locations and a lot of things in it that make it what it is for Shadowrun. A very good representation of the Shadowrun world. I think that's one of the reasons, is you look at Seattle and how it's written, it is the kind of a melting pot of the Shadowrun world that still exists. There aren't many of these melting pot type places that exist anymore because of everything that's happened in the world. And this has been an excuse, or this has been a unique version of something that still exists like that. Is its own thing, but it still feels like a little bit of our world. It feels a little bit of like our version of what we understand for politics and society and stuff like that, because it is influenced by the certainly the core of what was America from our kind of version of a time period. But it's just been altered in ways that make it still feel familiar to us, but be vastly different. It is a unique area, and it is an interesting area that just shows off a lot of the Shadowrun world. I think it's a prime example of Shadowrun. I think that's the best way to describe it. A prime example of all of it. So, I definitely recommend, if you're going to do a Shadowrun adventure, honestly, using Seattle, because there's a lot of information on it, is a good idea. It is the kind of like go-to location place to do this for, to get into Shadowrun from. Certainly there's other places you could do, but for your first adventures, it might be a good one with all this information, all the stuff you could look up on it to use it. And again, like, the 6th edition books, 5th edition books do add more to it in little bits amounts. But the book from 4th edition that I was using is my 2072 one. Yeah, it's a bit dated, like 10 years out, but it's going to give you the most amount of information that is accurate. A lot of the information provided there hasn't really changed in the last, decade in the Shadowrun universe. Probably some minor changes here and there, and honestly, they will be mentioned in most of the core books, which usually do give a little bit of information. That's the good thing about the core books of information. They do provide some things too. Certainly, you will find it in those books. Yeah. So, I think that's all I need to go about for this today. For those of you out there, I hope you enjoyed. You learned enough about Seattle that you're interested in using it for your Shadowrun games. Or you understand more why it is such a crucial city to Shadowrun in a way. It is Shadowrun as a whole. There's corporate and political, everything's boiling beneath the surface, and certainly that means there's a need for Shadowrunners to do their jobs. The little legal things that mess around with that anybody can disavow. You don't really know who you're hired by. You're hired by someone. And you're going to hire to do something. Who is it? You don't know? It's always the illegal things. It's the little things. Shadowrunners, independent contractors who do the crimes that are needed. Steal things here. Kidnap this person there. That's a Shadowrunner. Anyway, I will say, remember, every Tuesday and Thursday at around usually 1 p.m. to sometimes a little later, I have tabletops Tuesday, Thursday, starting usually around 1, and then Saturdays at 11 o'clock. So remember, check out all my times that I'm doing any of these things. I talk about a lot of different tabletop. I'll talk about more Shadowrun in the future, or plenty of other things. Check out on the YouTube side when this gets uploaded. Hi, YouTube. You will be usually a couple days afterwards at most. And yeah. So remember, check out all my links. I will be eventually updating things like my Patreon, but if you just want to put in for supporting me now, at very least, both following on Twitch, subscribing on YouTube, great things to do. I have a Discord and Twitter to join. That's all my shout-outs for now. Those give information about what I'm doing usually. I give updates on what's going on and little thought patterns and stuff on those various places. Great places to follow and learn stuff from me. I think that's everything I need to shout out, because I try to remember it now. But anyway, so, everyone out there, I bid all of you a wonderful